The minor league baseball season has been canceled. Rob Manfred said the quiet part out loud, and we have our first trade since the roster freeze was lifted. Happy Thursday, everyone, and thanks for tuning in for the second installment of Around the Bases here on the 110 Sports Network, streaming at 110sportsmedia.com/live. I'm Chris Brown, and a reminder that this show, along with the J-Mole Show and Touchline Talk, are also available in full on demand at 110sportsmedia.com on YouTube and in audio form on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Just search for 110 Sports. And we've been having some technical difficulties with some of our broadcasts recently on the Twitch and Twitch outages and other problems. So you can catch all the recent episodes of the J-Mole Show and Touchline Talk right now at 110sportsmedia.com. After we spent a lot of Tuesday's show, laying the groundwork for the shortened season, I was actually initially afraid we wouldn't have too much to talk about today, but it turns out there is plenty of news to react to and some interesting research to discuss. So I'll be here for about the next 40 to 45 minutes, a little bit of a shorter show today to break that all down. And let's go ahead and jump right into the rundown, what you can expect on today's show. We'll start this show just like every show by taking a look at some of the headlines across the league. A lot has changed in the last 48 hours, as of course this is an evolving situation as training camps start to open around the league. Players reporting yesterday. We'll talk about the headlines, then we'll get into Rob Manfred's recent comments. Yesterday, Manfred was on with Dan Patrick and had some very interesting things to say, so we'll talk about that. Then we'll talk about some players who could benefit from the shortened season, as promised on Tuesday, when we talked about some teams that could particularly benefit from the shortened season. Today, we'll look at some players, whether it be because of injuries that they're now recovered from, or players that are hot starters, or whether it's workload related. We'll talk about some players in particular who could benefit from the shortened season. Then we'll wrap things up with some odds and ends, some fun little tidbits, put a smile on my face when I saw them, just little fun baseball-related things as we head into the weekend here on the 110 Sports Network. So let's go ahead and dive in with today's headlines, and here is the big one. It was announced Tuesday afternoon or maybe Tuesday evening that the minor league baseball season this year has been canceled. Now, this was not a surprise. For people who hadn't been paying a lot of attention or just hadn't given much thought, seeing that headline on your Facebook feed or on Twitter might have been a little bit like, oh, I didn't even think of the minor leagues, or I guess that makes sense. But yeah, it had been something that people generally knew was coming for months. It was inevitable given the situation. That announcement was made by the minor league governing body, the National Association of Professional Baseball Leagues. President Pat O'Connor, in his digital news conference, saying, quote, "We are a fans in the stands business. We don't have national television revenues." There was a conversation at one point, he says, quote, "Well, can we play without fans?" And that was one of the shortest conversations in the last 6 months. It just didn't make any sense. And O'Connor estimated that 85 to 90% of revenue in the minor leagues comes from ticket sales, concessions, parking, and ballpark advertising combined. And obviously, those are all things that the team would not have coming in as revenue streams in a season like this had they attempted to play. With no minor league season, the majority of major league prospects will not receive any instruction this summer. Many major league teams have included or may include in the future some of their top prospects who are close to ready for the major leagues on their 60-man player pool. So they could receive some instructions, if not in the majors, as members of the team's taxi squads. But for most minor leaguers, this means no baseball for quite a while. All clubs have agreed to pay minor leaguers their weekly stipends of about $400 through the end of July. The status of minor leaguers being paid after that is unclear at this point. There's still the potential for an instructional fall league of some sort. Nothing set at this time, so there's always an Arizona Fall League in the fall for young prospects to partake in, but that's unclear at this time if that's going to happen this year. And to add some context to this all happening, the minors, pandemic aside, which is a weird phrase to say because you can't just put it aside, but pandemic aside, the minors are going to be changing greatly in the next couple of years. It appears that more than 40 teams are going to be losing their affiliation status with major league clubs. The minors are going to be realigned. Many teams at the bottom levels of the minor leagues are going to be eliminated. Not much is set in stone in that process yet, exactly which teams. Things are not set in stone, but when you add that in with the impact of the pandemic, many minor league teams are simply never going to recover. There are many minor league teams that may have played their very last game, and that's sad. That's sad for the game of baseball. That's sad for the players in those situations and the passionate everyone who's involved in those minor league levels working hard to put on baseball games and attract fans. But it is sort of the reality of where things stand right now. There is no fun ending to that. That's sort of where things stand with the minor leagues. Second news item of the day, we have our first trade after the transactions freeze that had been in effect was lifted on Friday. Our first trade of the baseball season. The Oakland A's have traded middle infielder Jorge Mateo to the San Diego Padres for a player to be named later. Not exactly a blockbuster. Nobody's getting super excited about it. It's just the idea that we have a trade. We have things happening. As for Mateo, he's been long regarded as a pretty top prospect in the minor leagues, but the 25-year-old has yet to debut in the majors. He's slowed down with his bat in the minor leagues in the last couple of years. He was a highly regarded top 25, top 30 prospect in the game for several years. Got to AAA, AA. His bat slowed down. He's now 25. He'll battle for a roster spot with the Padres amongst the contenders for the second base spot or a middle infield bench backup role. So, again, not a blockbuster, but hey, a trade's a trade. Now we have some injury updates for you. Cardinals closer Jordan Hicks will begin the 2020 season on the injured list. Hicks underwent Tommy John surgery last June and is still in the final stages of his recovery. The team does expect the 23-year-old to be ready to contribute before long. Yankees general manager Brian Cashman told reporters on Tuesday the team is optimistic about the status of 4 key players who are dealing with injuries. Barring no setbacks, the team is optimistic that starter James Paxton and outfielders Aaron Hicks, Giancarlo Stanton, and Aaron Judge will be ready for the start of the season. Paxton underwent back surgery in February. Hicks is returning from Tommy John surgery. Stanton, Cashman said, is likely to be ready to DH by opening day. And that's a little bit interesting because Stanton had a grade 1 calf strain almost 4 months ago. So the fact that he is not recovered seemingly to the point of being able to play the outfield is a little bit interesting, a little bit concerning from a health perspective, but Cashman saying Stanton is on track to be ready to DH by opening day. Judge, meanwhile, has been rehabbing from a stress fracture in his right rib. Our next note there, Angels' Shohei Ohtani is expected to be ready to go as a two-way player when the season starts. Ohtani is coming back from Tommy John surgery himself, and he'll likely be handled carefully, especially on the mound, but he will get a chance to pitch this season, and he will hit likely at least 4 times a week. And we have some new information just in this morning. The Phillies have placed 4 players on the injured list. Infielder and outfielder Scott Kingery, who was slated to be the Phillies' third baseman, as well as pitchers Tommy Hunter, Hector Neris, and Ranger Suarez were placed on the injured list. Also, Toronto placed infielder-outfielder Brandon Drury, as well as pitchers Elvis Luciano, Hector Perez, and outfielder Jonathan Davis on the IL. None of those players, the status has been made clear why those players are on the injured list. Those teams have not provided an explanation for those moves at last check. We do not want to, not going to get into speculation right now at this point, so we'll leave it at that and see if more information does come out. Which leads us to our next point, our next major headline of the day. Yankees general manager Brian Cashman first told reporters Tuesday that teams would not be able to disclose if players are placed on the COVID-19 special injured list. It would be left to the media and to fans to guess why the player is not available. And then the New York Post Joel Sherman tweeting out that consistent with the collective bargaining agreement, MLB teams may only disclose that a medical condition is preventing a player from rendering services if that player tests positive for COVID-19. So that teams can basically not disclose COVID-19 related information without a player giving voluntary permission. Players can announce on their own if they desire that they have tested positive, but the teams cannot do that on their own. We also have some new reporting. This was just a couple minutes ago. John Heyman of MLB Network tweeting that MLB is expected to announce a number of COVID tests taken and the number of positives tomorrow. He says it's believed that 2,000 plus tests were taken and the players have the option of announcing individual positives, though it may become apparent if the player goes on the injured list with no injury listed. So that's the status there. That's sort of an individual player perspective, individual player situation on this. Then when it comes to testing procedures and how this is all going to work, ESPN's Buster Olney tweeted yesterday that the sport is still awaiting word on transparency, that players and staff, he only saying in a tweet, not only do players and staffs deserve to know the complete test results, but also states and municipalities. Joel Sherman in the New York Post, as we mentioned, saying that MLB has not yet decided on how frequently they're going to be releasing data. Likely going to be weekly, but this is an evolving situation. We're likely to learn more in the coming days. One of our other headlines, the Field of Dreams game. MLB is still planning that Field of Dreams game in Iowa in August. It was going to be the White Sox and the Yankees, but during this MLB season, it's going to be teams just playing other teams in their region. Of course, the Yankees nowhere near Iowa, not going to be playing the White Sox in the regular season. It's been reported yesterday, first by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and by 670 The Score in Chicago, that the Cardinals will replace the Yankees in that game and take on the Cubs. The league has been working to construct a field at the Diamond in Iowa, where Field of Dreams was filmed in 1988. One final note for you here. Cardinals president of baseball operations told reporters yesterday he's heard the 2020 schedule will be released early next week, and apparently teams have been working with an unofficial schedule that they can use for planning purposes. And those are our headlines for today, except for we have one just within the last couple of minutes, which could play a big role in the race in the NL Central, and that is the Cubs releasing a statement that left-handed pitcher Jose Quintana, while washing dishes in his home on Saturday, suffered a laceration on his left thumb. He underwent microscopic surgery, and it identified a lacerated digital sensory nerve in his left thumb, which was surgically repaired. Quintana is expected to resume a throwing program in approximately 2 weeks, and then his status moving forward will be his timeline will be sort of evaluated, and we'll have some sort of timeline for his recovery. But that does put Quintana's season in doubt for the Cubs, no doubt about it, and that makes the Cubs' rotation pretty thin. We'll have more time to talk about this in the days ahead, but that could be a major blow to the Cubs, as that's a team without as much pitching depth as it's had in previous years. So that could really make an impact in the NL Central race. And that is a look at your headlines for today. Let's go ahead and jump right into something I didn't think we were going to be talking about this time yesterday. The comments weren't made. I was wondering where we were going to start with the first segment. But we're going to start with Rob Manfred's comments yesterday. The commissioner went on the Dan Patrick Show, and this is what you see on the screen here. This is the big quote that everybody pulled and that people were reacting to the most. Manfred said, quote, "The reality is we weren't going to play more than 60 games no matter how the negotiations with the players went or any other factor." So Manfred said the quiet part out loud. And the Players Union is going to save that quote for later. And there's a reason this is important. The March agreement between the players and the owners, which turned out to be the basis for how baseball was able to mandate a schedule, this is the exact wording of part of that agreement. It requires that both sides, the players and the owners, quote, "work in good faith to, as soon as is practicable, commence play and complete the fullest 2020 championship season and postseason that is economically feasible." So you probably heard this phrase a good bit, the whole idea of working in good faith to complete the longest season possible. And now Manfred comes out and says, The commissioner says we were never going to play more than 60 games. And that sounds like the league was just never negotiating in good faith. I'm not saying that's absolutely the case, but that's what that statement says. That's what those words mean. I mean, the agreement was to work in good faith to have the longest season. And here's Manfred saying, yeah, we were never going to have more than 60 games. It also doesn't make sense in the context that early in the negotiations between the two sides, reports indicated that baseball wanted opening day to come around the 4th of July, which would have been 2 days from now, this weekend. So, assuming that reporting wasn't wrong, which came from a number of reputable outlets, what is with that? And that was the headline quote, but Manfred's interview with Patrick was pretty long, and Patrick did follow up and ask him if he and the owners would have agreed to a longer season had the players agreed to their demands, every one of their demands. If the players just said sure, would baseball have agreed to a longer season? And this is what Manfred said. He said, "It's the calendar, Dan. We're playing 60 games in 63 days right now. I don't see, given the reality of the health situation over the past few weeks, how we were going to get going any faster than the calendar we're on right now." Really? Really? Manfred's really claiming that if there had been an agreement for a season 3 weeks before it happened, or 4 weeks before it happened, before there actually was a schedule mandated, that they still wouldn't have been able to start the season sooner at all. That if there was an agreement 3 weeks before the season was mandated, that they couldn't be starting the season right about now. I don't buy that. I just don't buy that at all. The commissioner continued saying, "Look, we did get a suboptimal result from the negotiations. That's what happens when you have a negotiation that, instead of being collaborative, gets into a conflict situation." So, first, it was that they were never going to play more than 60 games regardless of how the negotiations went. Then, when he's asked if there was a scenario in which there could have been a longer season, even where the players gave them everything they wanted, Manfred said that suboptimal results were the result of conflict in the negotiation process, which just adds a level of further confusion on top of the nonsense. So which is it? Is it that the health situation meant that you were never going to have more than 60 games, which doesn't make sense because if you had been starting this process 3 weeks sooner, 4 weeks sooner, I can't imagine that we couldn't be having baseball starting now instead of the end of the month? Or is it that it's the players' fault, or is he blaming the players? Is that what he's claiming? That because it was a conflict, the negotiations were a conflict, that's why there's a suboptimal result in the end, which was the mandated 60-game season. One thing that is important to note in all of this, it is easy to be mad and frustrated at Rob Manfred, and it's pretty fun. I'm not saying that's unfounded. For a smart guy, he keeps saying some pretty dumb stuff. I mean, of course, he got the headlines a few weeks ago when he said one day that he was 100% sure, 100% confident there would be a baseball season. 5 days later, after the players had said, "Okay, tell us when, tell us where," he says, "Yeah, I'm not 100% confident anymore." Now he's doing that kind of thing again. But the important context to keep in mind here is that Manfred represents MLB team owners. Those team owners have the ability to fire the commissioner. It's in many respects them who he is speaking for. And I'm not saying that to say that Manfred doesn't deserve blame or criticism, but rather to say that this is much more than just his attitude and his approach. Marlins CEO Derek Jeter said the other day that there's quote, there's no trust between the league and the union. Not exactly a stunning and shocking quote, but he said there's no trust between the two sides. And then Manfred comes out and says something like this: it's no wonder there's no trust. It's no wonder that this is happening, that there's no trust, that there's this distrust between the two sides. I've talked about it for the last couple of weeks. I talked about it on the J-Mole show a couple weeks ago, last week actually, that there's this distrust between the two sides. And when Rob Manfred comes out and says something like this, like, no matter what happens, we were going to just play 60 games. Were the negotiations, were they ever negotiating in good faith? Doesn't look like it. Not from that statement, at least. If the players decide to file a grievance, which is something they still have the ability to do and are still considering and may file in the future, you know that quote from Rob Manfred is going to be one of the things that they cite. No doubt about it. That distrust is real, and it's going to be around for a while until there's something worked out. I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. We're going to go ahead and take our first break of the show. We'll shift gears to something more fun when we come back. Last show we talked about some teams that could benefit in particular from the shortened season. Today we're going to talk about some players who in particular could benefit from the shortened season for various reasons, whether it be health related, whether it be that they're hot starters. Did a little research on that, some interesting players to look out for. We'll talk about that next. You're watching Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases here, streaming at 110sportsmedia.com/live. I'm Chris Brown. Great to be with you here on this Thursday, and we're going to talk in just a moment here about some players who could, in particularly, benefit from this shortened season. But first, do want to mention this real quick. Just talked about Rob Manfred and the comments he made yesterday. Just within the last 10 minutes, Manfred, unsurprisingly, it was just a matter of when it was going to happen today, attempted to walk back his comments in a story just published about 10 minutes ago from USA Today Sports. Manfred telling Bob Nightingale of USA Today, he seek to clarify his comments. He's saying, quote, "As it turned out, the reality was there was only time to play 60 games. If we had started an 82-game season beginning July 1st, we would have had people in Arizona and Florida the time the second spike of COVID-19 hit." That was Rob Manfred to Bob Nightingale just today, attempting to clarify, walk back his comments that he made yesterday on the Dan Patrick Show, in which he said that there was never going to be more than a 60-game season. I think that's, I'm not a medical expert, obviously. Manfred's talking to medical experts, but I still think that attempt to clarify does not answer all the problems, things that were problematic about what Manfred said yesterday. He's saying that even if they had come to an agreement a few weeks before, they wouldn't have been able to start now, basically, like what they would have wanted with the 82-game season because of the spikes that are going on in Arizona and Florida. And those are significant. The Arizona and Florida spikes are significant, but they're not. It's not as if it's much better now. Like, it's not as if there was a spike a week or two ago and now everything's fine. So I don't quite understand Manfred's comments to attempt to walk that back. But, we'll see how that plays out, how people receive his attempt to clarify his statement there. And we'll go ahead and dive now into the fun stuff as promised. On Tuesday, we talked about some teams that could benefit from the shortened seasons. Teams that had either played deep into the postseason. We talked about the Nationals and had players who had pitched a lot of innings. Teams who had players coming back from injuries. And so today we're going to talk about some players in particular who could benefit from the shortened season. And there's 3 different ways to look at this. Actually, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. I took 3 different approaches to look at this. One is simply health-related. Players who wouldn't have been healthy at the beginning of the 2020 season had it started on time back in March and April. We talked on Tuesday about Justin Verlander for the Astros, James Paxton for the Yankees, Aaron Judge, and Giancarlo Stanton, who we mentioned just a few minutes ago at the top of the show in the headlines for the day. They're all expected to be good to go for the resumption of baseball here in the shortened season at the end of the month. They would not have been ready to go, most likely, come opening day in a normal circumstance because of different injuries that they had. A couple other names that are going to benefit from the shortened season from a health perspective. Yordan Alvarez, the outfielder and DH for the Houston Astros, burst onto the scene as one of the best hitters in baseball. That's what he was hitting like last year. He was dealing with soreness in both of his knees in spring training, knee soreness that he's had experienced last year as well. And hopefully the time off helps him because the Astros are going to need him as a big bat in their lineup. Another name of a player who could benefit from a health perspective, Rich Hill of the Twins. Hill was expected to miss at least the first half of the season after an off-season elbow surgery. Hill, technically, it seemed like he required Tommy John. He had a different surgery, one that had a shortened timetable to return because he is 40 years old. The time to recover from Tommy John is extensive. We're talking over a year for a pitcher. So Hill took a different approach, hoping that he can keep pitching for another year or two. The 40-year-old signed a 1-year deal with the Twins in the offseason, and he has been one of the best pitchers in baseball when he's been healthy, and that's not an exaggeration. Hill hasn't had an ERA over 3.25 since 2014, and his strikeout rate, he's had a strikeout rate of over 10 strikeouts per 9 innings in each of the last 7 seasons. He has literally he's been one of the most dominant pitchers in the game when he has been healthy. There just hasn't been enough of that. But when you combine the fact that he is hopefully healthy now, there's obviously wild cards in that he's recovering from surgery, and a surgery that was a different route to take rather than Tommy John, which he might have had if he was 25 and not 40. But when he's at his best, he is a dominant pitcher, and you combine him hopefully healthy now with the shortened season and the lightened workload for him, and he could be a crucial piece of the Twins' rotation alongside Jose Barrios and others as they attempt to take down the Indians and potentially the White Sox as well in the AL Central to claim that division. And speaking of workload, that is another way that you can approach looking at players who could benefit from the shortened season. So on Tuesday, we talked about two pitchers who are going to benefit from that perspective most likely, and that's Max Scherzer and Steven Strasburg, the Nationals' two top pitchers. Both of them pitched really deep in the postseason. Last year, both of them were just crucial in the Nationals' World Series championship. Both of them have noted injury histories. Scherzer's is not very extensive. He's been very healthy and very durable for years. Last year had some back problems that caused him to miss some starts here and there. Strasburg has a very noted injury history, though he's remained largely healthy in recent years. But for both of them, having the decreased workload of this season and the amount of time off to rest and recover could be crucial for the Nationals. And that's, as we talked about on Tuesday, an older team that's going to need to rely on those two pitchers again if they're going to make it back to the playoffs and far in the playoffs. We also talked about the Rays' starting pitchers, Charlie Morton, Tyler Glasnow, and Blake Snell, who both have noted injury histories, but also just durability concerns, who haven't pitched a lot of innings year after year after year. So that could be really beneficial for them not to have to make 30 starts, but rather 11 starts or 12 starts max. Another name we haven't talked about is Jon Lester. And I wrote this point before we had the news that Jose Quintana was going to miss, it looks like, significant time in the season after injuring his hand. Jon Lester becomes even more important to the Cubs now. He's the anchor of the Cubs rotation. He's been worth every penny that they signed him for back, it's been 5 or 6 years ago now. He's 36 years old. He continues to eat innings for the Cubs, but last year in the final 2 months of the season, he had a 6.03 ERA and a 1.8 whip. That was over the final 2 months of the season, and he wore down deep into the 2018 season as well. So for Lester, the idea of not having to pitch that deep into a season, I mean, he was wearing down 120 innings into a season, plus, somewhere in that range, 120, 130, 140 innings, then he was wearing down. The shorter season could really help him avoid fatigue, and he's going to be really crucial for the Cubs in a rotation that is getting thinner, especially without Quintana. And they really need something from Lester this year. That's a Cubs team that has, due in large part to financial restrictions, they've sort of maxed out. They haven't been able to spend a lot of money in recent years. They've slipped a little bit closer to the pack in the NL Central. They're not really a wide favorite for that division. I think a lot of people would have them as the favorite for the NL Central, but right now it's really 4 teams. Maybe you want to say 3 if you don't think the Reds are there yet, but 3 teams, in that case the Cubs, Cardinals, and Brewers, that are all expected to be good, somewhere between okay and really good. They're all kind of in that range of, you'd expect all of them to finish above 500, but none of them to be the best team in baseball. So they slipped a little bit closer to the pack. They're not the far and away favorites for that division. So Lester could be really crucial, and him not having to pitch as many innings help him stay fresher longer, pitch deep into games. Could be really crucial for the Cubs this season. The third way, which is really the main reason for this segment, is look at the players. A third way that players could benefit from the shortened season is that there are certain players who are known to be fast starters. Other players are known to be slow starters. We're mostly talking about hitters, but it can be pitchers too. And this could play a major role in the 2020 shortened season because we're going from 162 games down to 60. So players who are known to get off to really hot starts and then cool off, well, they could get off to hot starts and just never cool off because by the time they would cool off, the season's over. Or you could have your notoriously slow starters who are known for being not very good in April and May. Well, if that happens again in the shortened season, by the time they figure it out, it could be too late. The season is over, and they're a star player who didn't perform for their team, and their team's not in the playoffs. There's going to be some great players who struggle to get things going, and with the combination of less time to right the ship and the pressure that comes from the limited time, you're going to have less time. You only have 60 games. You can't, figure it out in game 40 and be great the rest of the season, and your team's going to be fine because if you figure it out in game 40 and you're a star for your team could already be in a really bad spot. So the pressure of that for players could lead to some star players struggling out of the gate and not being able to figure it out. Other players who get off to great starts, whether they're established stars or whether they're not, may be able to ride that, like I said, the whole rest of the season. So I went ahead and looked back at both some 60-game stretches to start the season, as well as some March and April splits to see which players have been consistently hot starters. So there's some players who've had incredible Aprils and Mays, incredible first couple months of the season in individual seasons. One time, Justin Smoke got off to an incredible start a couple years ago. I think it was 2017. He was one of the best hitters in baseball through April and May, but he hasn't been a consistent hot starter. So I wanted to look and see who's been consistently really good to start the season. I took the approach of looking at March and April splits. So that's really not your first 60 games, but the first 30 games of the season. Those splits are easy to find, easy to work with. So I looked at that, and I also looked at 60-game stretches to start the season over the past 5 or 6 years to see what players consistently showed up as having great 60-game stretches to start the season. It's important to note, before we dive into this, the names, that it's not set that this is going to carry over. This is really unique circumstances. This is not normal season. We all know that, so you have to take this all with a grain of salt. But these were some names that I found that were intriguing. Bryce Harper is the first one. Among active players with at least 300 at-bats in their career in March and April, Harper has an OPS of over 1,000, and that's the best in Major League Baseball. Number 2 is Mike Trout. Through his team's first 60 games in a season, Harper has hit double-digit home runs 7 times in his 9 Major League seasons. So you take the first 60 games of the Nationals and then the Phillies seasons, each of the last 9 years that Harper's been in the major leagues, he's hit double-digit home runs in those first 60 games 7 times. Last year with the Phillies, in his first year with the Phillies, he hit only 11 home runs, but he hit in those first 60 games, but he hit 20 home runs in those first 60 games in 2015, 18 in 2018, and 15 in 2017 in the Nationals' first 60 games. In fact, Harper actually leads baseball in home runs in March and April in regular season play over the last 5 years. So he's going to be really someone to watch as the regular season gets started. He could be more comfortable with Philadelphia now, settled in there with the Phillies. Obviously, that's a really competitive division where we're getting off to a good start in the NL East. For the Phillies, could be really huge for them. So that could be really something to watch. Harper has consistently, year after year, there's practically nobody better, at least from a power perspective, in terms of getting off to a good start each year than Harper. Second name is a little bit less of a star, someone you may not have thought about in a while. That's Carlos Martinez. He's slated to be back in the Cardinals' rotation this season after dealing with shoulder injuries for much of the last 2 years. The talent has been there for Martinez. Health has just been the problem, particularly recently. He was regarded as one of the best pitchers, best young pitchers in the National League just a couple years ago, and then those injuries started to pile up. He came back in relief for the Cardinals last season. But over the past 5 years, Martinez has a 2.39 ERA and an opponent's batting average of under 200 in March and April. And those are both the lowest marks among pitchers who have at least 100 innings in those months. So basically, he's been, in terms of ERA and opponent's batting average, among starters who've pitched significant innings, over the last 5 years, Martinez has been the best pitcher in the first couple months of the season. That's an oversimplification, but that's someone to watch out for, a name people might not be paying too much attention to because he hasn't been a great star the last couple of years because he's been dealing with those injuries, but someone to definitely watch out for the Cardinals. He could have a real impact for them. If he's able to be a great pitcher and regain some of his previous form alongside Jack Flaherty, that could be a really good top of the rotation for the Cardinals as they compete in, of course, a very competitive NL Central. Third player to talk about here is Freddie Freeman, the Braves first baseman. His average through the Braves' first 60 games of the season, each of the past 3 years. In 2017, he was hitting .341 through the Braves' first 60 games with a 1,200 OPS. That was in 2017. In 2018, through the Braves' first 60 games, Freeman was hitting .328 with a 950 OPS. And last season, through the first 60 games, Freeman was hitting .310 with a 970 OPS. In fact, Freeman's OPS through his team's first 60 games is... So basically what this is, the stat's a little complicated to describe here. So I look back at the past 5 years of data through each team's first 60 games to see which batters were consistently on that list year after year of having great seasons. And I looked cumulatively through a 5-season stretch for the first 60 games to see which batters had the highest marks. And Freeman's OPS through his team's first 60 games of the season is 10th among all players where there's a sample size of more than 1 year. So he's consistently been one of the best hitters in terms of OPS in baseball in 60-game stretches to begin seasons. It's a bit of a mouthful, and at some point you're parsing the data so much that maybe it doesn't mean too much. But Freeman, the point is Freeman has been getting off to hot starts year after year in recent years. Finally, another interesting name here, Mike Moustakas, second baseman for the Reds. Moustakas is a really underrated hitter. He's hit between 28 and 38 home runs each of the last 3 seasons with RBI totals between 85 and 95 and averages between basically 250 and 270. His March and April OPS for his career is 828, which is easily the best of any month for Moustakas, nearly 50 points higher than any other month. In his team's first 60 games, Moustakas has hit double-digit home runs in each of the last 3 seasons. 15 in 2017, 12 in 2018, 16 in 2019. Moustakas is expected to bat cleanup for a Reds team that has made some interesting moves between last season's trade deadline and through the offseason. They added Moustakas to a 4-year deal. They added Nick Castellanos to a 4-year deal. They traded for Trevor Bauer at last year's trade deadline, and he joins a rotation with Luis Castillo, Sonny Gray, Trevor Bauer, and Wade Miley, which could be easily the best rotation in the NL Central. And like I said, that NL Central division is wide open. The Reds are probably picked by most people to finish 4th behind the Brewers, Cardinals, and Cubs in some order or another. But really, that is an open division. The Reds are a good team. They're at least a solid team. And in a season like this, they could get off to a great start. If Moustakas and Castellanos are hitting, that rotation is firing on all cylinders, that could be a team that surprises a lot of people. So those are just a couple of players. There's others as well who've had individual great starts last season, but these are some guys who year after year have gotten off to great starts. And if that translates in 2020 in this weird environment, that could mean a major impact for those teams getting off to a good start themselves. And in a 60-game season, a good 20 or 30-game stretch with a great record to start the season could be go a long way toward winning your division. All right, so we're going to go ahead and take our final break of the show now. When we get back, Couple final odds and ends, some fun notes here heading into the weekend. We'll be right back. You're watching Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases here on the 110 Sports Network. I'm Chris Brown. Great to be with you here on this Thursday as we wind things down on the show. Final notes for you today. Couple odds and ends, and then we'll send you off to the weekend here, hopefully. And a couple things to keep in mind here. First off, just a couple fun little tidbits that I found were interesting over the last couple days. Number one, MLB's operations manual for its return is detailed. Obviously, the situation with health and safety is a really important and serious topic. MLB's final 2020 operations manual for the season is 113 pages long. And it says final, the tweet was it's the final operations manual. It's going to be tweaked. It's going to be changed. Protocols are going to be changed throughout the season. That's inevitable. But the final working operations manual, 113 pages long, detailing health and safety protocols. It's incredibly detailed, and that detail in some cases is a bit comical. I mean, it's just a little bit funny because Kyle Glasser of Baseball America tweeting yesterday, his personal favorite of the manual, no ketchup or mustard bottles are allowed, only individual packets. That's how much detail they're getting into. We're talking about the way that condiments can be brought into players and in the ballpark environment. So you cannot say that they were not thorough in this health and safety manual. We'll see how much of it has to change in the coming weeks. Another fun little note here, Oakland A's fans can be at the ballpark this season, virtually. The team announced yesterday that fans can purchase cutouts online at athletics.com/cutouts, and the proceeds from those cutouts are going to go to a local food bank, a youth development center, and the Oakland African American Chamber of Commerce. So fans can send a photo of themselves in A's gear, and that photo will be added to their cutout that they purchase. And then if their cutout gets hit by a foul ball, the A's will send that ball to the fan. Then there's the option at the end of the season for all fans to have their cutouts sent to them. Fans who purchase it also receive 2 tickets to the A's first exhibition home game next season. That's just a really fun idea. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out with games at the Coliseum. With the camera angles, we'll see all these cutouts of fans in their A's gear in the seats, and the money from that going to outstanding causes. So that's just a really fun idea. I saw just a few minutes ago, it looks like the Brewers are doing something similar. I imagine a lot of teams are So I may have just missed some other ones, and it may be a very big trend, but I just saw the athletics one. I think that's just an outstanding idea. Finally, here today, we're just going to talk a little bit about what's on deck, what's ahead for baseball in the next couple of days. We won't be back here until Tuesday, so 5 days from now. Players reported to spring training camps yesterday, and it appears to be summer training is the way we're going to refer to it, but there's still a little bit of people going both ways on that. Players reported yesterday, but not much is happening just yet. There's been some talk with the media between managers and media members, so there's been some information coming out, but more is going to come out in the days ahead because the first workouts for many teams are slated for tomorrow. We're likely going to be learning much more about the status of individual players and managers' thought process about how they're going to handle bullpens and roster competitions and position battles. All those things are likely going to learn much more about that in the days ahead. So I imagine there's going to be, in fact, I'm confident there's going to be plenty to talk about come Tuesday. And we'll have plenty of time to break it down on Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. So that is going to do it for our show today on this Thursday. Thanks so much for watching the second edition of Around the Bases here on the 110 Sports Network. As I mentioned, I'll be back with you here on Tuesday at 1 Eastern. Certainly going to be lots of new developments to discuss as training camps get underway. Don't forget to check out the latest written content at 110sportsmedia.com, including our ongoing series regrading NFL and NBA drafts of the 2010s, ranking the top 100 college basketball players of the last decade, and I have an ongoing series looking at the top 10 players in baseball at each position of the last 10 years. So we're through shortstop right now. So is it Posey or Molina? Is it Cabrera or Votto? Is it Cano or Altuve or maybe Kinsler? Is it Tulowitzki or Lindor? Some interesting battles, some interesting stuff to make decisions on in those top 10s. You can catch those stories at 110sportsmedia.com right now. And remember that 110 Sports Live coverage continues tomorrow with the J Moles Show with Josh Molinix at 11 a.m. Eastern, which will also air at the same time slot again then on Monday. And then on Tuesday, it's Touchline Talk with Josh Doring at 11 a.m. Eastern, with Around the Bases airing, like I said, at 1 Eastern. So thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll talk to you on Tuesday.